السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم عبده ورسوله. Welcome to the fourth episode in our series on Islamic legal maxims, Al-Qawaid Al-Fiqhiyya. The main maxim that we'll look at today is called Al-Yaqinu la yuzalu bishak. It's sometimes also phrased Al-Yaqinu la yazulu bishak. Basically, the meaning is very similar in both, which is that certainty is not displaced by doubt. So yaqeen means certainty, and shak means doubt. Shak in fiqh terms means that there are two possibilities, there are divergent possibilities, and one is undecided about which one is more likely to be true. And that's the meaning of it in this maxim. The scholars of usul al-fiqh, they divide the certainty which you know about something into a more finely graded spectrum. So yaqeen is that about which you're certain, and shak is when you're at that 50-50 point and you're balanced, you're not sure which one is true. If the balance tips a little bit to one side, that's called dhann. And if the balance increases so that it's a very strong evidence for one of the possibilities while not completely ruling out the other one, that's called ghalabatul dhann or al-dhann al-rajih. And then the opposite of that is al-wahm. Wahm is something that there is a possibility, but it's very weak. So in fiqh terms, yaqeen is something that you're certain about. And the rule applies with regard to yaqeen about every other one of these categories. If you're talking about dhann al-rajih, which is almost like certainty, it's a very strong possibility in the mind based upon evidence, then that also takes precedence over dhann, which is just not really corroborated by very strong evidence, or by shak, or in all cases, wahm. So that which you know based upon certainty cannot be overridden or displaced by something about which you're not certain. That's what this maxim is saying. So what that does is that it provides a basis in fiqh discussions with knowing who in a discussion needs to provide evidence and who just has to defend passively against the other person's evidence. In other words, if you have the default position with you, then you don't have to provide extra evidence to defend the default position. So for instance, Allah said that water is pure. So that's the starting assumption with water. Now, you can assume that water that you come upon is pure unless you have evidence to the contrary. It's not clear, there's some kind of murkiness to it, or there's some kind of a smell, or you taste it, tastes off. So any one of those three would be sufficient to say, wait a minute, my assumption about the purity of this water, it's now being challenged by evidence. So when you have evidence to displace a starting assumption, then you have to go with the evidence, otherwise not. So as far as evidence for this principle in the Sharia texts, we have a recurring kind of statement in the Quran. It's formulated differently in various places, but the gist of it, إِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. Verily, dhann is of no avail against haqq. So haqq is what is firmly established, and dhann is something which you have some reason for it, but maybe it's not that strong. The thing that needs to be pointed out here is that when you come to understanding the Quran, the same word may not necessarily mean the same thing every place that it's mentioned. So in this context, a dhann is talking about the beliefs of idolaters, about their gods, and about reality. And so these are purely suppositions. That's the meaning of dhann here. Sometimes dhann does actually mean other things. The person who's given his book in his right hand, he says, إِنِّي ظَنَنْتُ أَنِّي مُلَاقٍ حِسَابِيَ. I had a dhann that I would be confronted with judgment of my acts. So that kind of a dhann there is certainty. I mean, he knew that he was going to have to account for himself on the Day of Judgment, and so he lived his life accordingly. So that's just like a sort of a sidebar on this topic. When looking at the meaning of a word in a particular passage, just because it means something in one passage does not necessarily mean that it will mean the same thing everywhere. So turning now to the Sunnah and evidence for this principle from the Sunnah, we have two hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that were narrated by a number of Sahaba, famously Abu Hurairah and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri and others, that if a person is in doubt how many rakats he prayed, then he should base his salat and continue on the basis of what he's certain. He's not sure, did he pray 2 or 3? So he disregards the idea that he might have prayed a 3rd rakat. He knows that he did pray 2, so he builds his salat based on what he's certain of, and then he makes 2 prostrations at the end of the salat in order to repair the deficiency that was based on his failure of concentration. Then there's another hadith where, again, it's Abu Hurairah. He mentioned that a man asked the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I feel that something, moving around in my gut during the salat. So he has a sense that maybe something escaped, some gas passed out of his body while he was praying. What should he do? And so the Prophet ﷺ, he said he should not pay it any mind unless he hears a sound or smells a smell. Because these kind of tickling, uncertainty, did this happen or did it not? If a person pays attention to those kinds of feelings and wonderings and whispering, it becomes a means by which shaitan plays with the person. And he breaks the salat, he goes and he makes wudu again, he comes and he prays, and the same thing happens again. There's only so many times you're going to do that before you say, wait a minute, this religion is too hard to practice. And so in order to nip all of that in the bud, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't pay attention to those kinds of whisperings, only when you have clear-cut evidence that something has happened, that you act on that basis. So that's evidence for the ruling, for the principle. Now, what about some of the applications? If a person thinks, did I pay zakat? Now, I'm not sure, I gave somebody something, but did I have the intention of zakat? You're supposed to have the intention when you give it. That's part of the act. For whatever reason, if the person is unsure, did I pay the zakat? Then he has to assume that he didn't, because that's the starting assumption. We'll take a short break and we're back soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
The students of Islamic International Schools, Chennai.
Islam, the religion of peace. Islam is the only solution to the problems of humanity.
The Islamic Sharia is complete, it's perfect.
Vision focused, faith firm.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, enter into the religion of peace, Islam.
We are the followers of the religion of peace.
Ability outstanding.
The Quran, from cover to cover, is a message of peace.
And the last and final instruction manual for the human being, it is the glorious Quran.
Watch Wafa Sarfaraz, Zunaira Ayman, Sahib Said, Nausheen Zara, Hasib Khan, Fahad Abdur Rahman, Rida Tabassum, Sayyid Zaid, and Abid Baris.
La ilaha illallah. There is no deity worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
As these righteous and dedicated dais from Islamic International School, Chennai, present the way to achieve true success in Ambassadors of Islam. Every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. and repeat telecast at 10:30 a.m. Saudi Arabia on Peace TV.
A friendly message by Dr. Zakir. Islam prohibits killing of innocent human beings.
Every day, innocent human beings are being killed in different parts of the world. Most religions condemn the killing of innocent human beings. But Islam goes a step further and says in the glorious Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter number 5, verse number 32, if anyone kills a human being, unless it be for murder or for spreading corruption in the land, it would be as if he has killed the whole of humankind. It does not stop here, but continues. And if anyone saved a single human life, it would be as if he has saved the life of the entire humankind. Remember, please do not kill a single innocent human being, but rather save the whole of humankind by saving human lives.
Human life is precious. Peace TV, the solution for humanity.
Another famous example of this principle in fiqh, the principle that certainty is not displaced by doubt, is the case of a missing person. In the old days, people didn't have mobile phones, there was no internet, communication was difficult. So a person travels and he's gone longer than people expected, and his absence stretches and stretches. Can we now assume that he is dead? Well, we know for sure that he was alive, and whether or not he's still alive is a matter of doubt, but the new proposition is that he's dead, and we don't have evidence for that. So what we knew for certain has to be carried on into the future until there is evidence of something different. Therefore, his property would not be divided up. That's a famous repercussion of that ruling. And his wife would still be considered to be his wife, not his widow. Now, in the classical era, they said that this assumption has to continue on until the man reaches or would have reached the age of 90. Or, you know, sometimes there's different numbers attached to what would trigger that ruling that, well, nothing heard of him for so long that we have to assume that he's dead, when that ruling would be triggered. That's the kind of ruling that can change based upon changing circumstances, because, you know, if you live in an era where, and you have those means, that you have mobile phones, you have internet, you have this well-established global communication system, and the person disappeared in an area where he had access to those things, after a while, then there would be cause to review that ruling. And some, if I recall, there were some classical fiqh opinions about 4 years being a limit or a period of time where a review would be conducted. Another example of this is that if you're fasting in the Ramadan and the sky is cloudy, you're not sure, let's say you're traveling, you're out in the desert, you're not sure when exactly the sunset is as far as time goes, and so you're not sure. Can I break my fast? It's kind of dark, but it's also cloudy. Is that darkness because of the cloudiness or because of the sunset? Well, you can't break your fast until you're sure. That's based upon this rule. An example of this in Islamic finance is a case of mudaraba. Mudaraba is basically a silent partnership. There's one person who has funds, capital, and he wants to invest them, but he's not well experienced in whatever it is that he wants to invest in. And you have an entrepreneur who doesn't have capital. So they come together, and the entrepreneur uses the capital that is put forward by the Rabbul Mal, and he does business with it, or he puts it to use in some way to make a profit. So the business doesn't work out. Now, this is a trust-based contract, and the capital provider is supposed to exercise due diligence. Don't get into this kind of a contract unless you know the person that you're giving the money to. So you're supposed to have done your due diligence, and you're satisfied that this person is trustworthy. So therefore, the business ends up not making a profit. You can't, as the capital provider, say, wait a minute, you have done something wrong. There's something fishy going on here. I want my money back. You can't do that unless there is clear-cut evidence that the mudarib has been neglectful, or that he's violated the terms that were agreed to in the way that he's supposed to run. He has done some gross moral violation, misappropriated the money for his personal use. Those kinds of evidences are required in order for a suspicion of this sort to actually reach a level where a judgment could be based upon it. Otherwise, the default ruling is in favor of the entrepreneur, the mudarib, because this is a trust-based contract. This particular maxim has quite a few corollaries and subsidiary maxims. One of the most important of them is al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha. This means that the basic ruling with regard to things is that they're lawful. And this has strong evidence for it from the Quran. هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. So this is a general, broad, sweeping statement of lawfulness. It is He, Allah, who made for you everything that is on the earth. That's in Surah Al-Baqarah. In Surah Al-An'am, it mentions that, it says, وَقَدْ فَصَّلَ لَكُمْ مَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. He has explained for you in detail that which He has prohibited for you. So you have this general ruling mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah that everything on the earth was made for human beings. And then you have a restrictive ruling that says everything that is prohibited to you, there's going to be some detailed evidence to exclude it from that general ruling of lawfulness. So this combination of these two verses becomes a very powerful principle in fiqh, that somebody says, shrimp is unlawful. Okay, well, that basic rule just said that everything on the earth was made for us. And moreover, with regard to that which lives in the sea, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ صَيْدُ الْبَحْرِ وَطَعَامُهُ مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِلسَّيَّارَةِ. the game, what you catch from the sea and its food, it has been made lawful for you. So if somebody wants to claim that shrimp is unlawful, you have to bring positive evidence to surmount all of this general evidence, which is comprehensive, and it doesn't leave any room for speculation. It's not like, well, we don't know whether this is lawful or unlawful, so now we're going to start digging. No, you have to assume that it's lawful, and then if you have any suspicion, it has to be very strong in order to override this starting rule. And one of the repercussions, or let's say the corollaries of this principle with regard to business in particular, is that al-aslu fil uqud al-ibaha. The basic rule with regard to contracts is that they're lawful. And Allah said, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. So this is a sweeping statement. Allah has made trade lawful, and He's prohibited riba. So exchange contracts, the basic rule for them is that they're lawful. If somebody wants to say that a given kind of a contract is unlawful, they have to show why. That's why, this principle has been accepted and is one of the cornerstones in Islamic finance, because, the argument goes, not everything that comes to us from the West is necessarily haram. You have to go through the process that was mentioned in the second episode, which is takyif fiqhi. You have to analyze and see what are the elements of this contract. If it contains elements that are prohibited, there's some specific feature about it which runs across a violation, then yes, it's prohibited. Otherwise, a person who comes with this new kind of contract is not required to prove why it's lawful. So therefore, the person who's challenging the legality of a given contract, he is the one who is required to provide evidence, since the starting rule is that exchange contracts are lawful. There is another facet to this issue which is far more controversial. It's a principle that was adopted in the Hanbali madhab and tended to be rejected by the other madhabs, and that is with regard to shurut, conditions. Conditions of contracts is the basic rule with conditions that they're lawful or unlawful. Those who say that the basic rule is that they're lawful is, they go by this hadith which says, al-muslimuna ala shurutihim illa shartan harrama halalan aw halala haraman. Muslims are bound by the conditions they agree to, except for a condition which makes the halal haram, or the opposite. So the authenticity of this hadith has been challenged by some scholars. Scholars like Shaykh al-Albani considers it at least hasan. It was narrated by, I believe, Abu Dawood and some of those ashab as-sunan. The other evidence that the other side uses with regard to that is the statement of the Prophet in a hadith where he said, every condition that is not in the book of the law is invalid, even if there are 100 such conditions. But if you look at the context in which that was said, it was where that condition that he was talking about was explicitly prohibited, not in the Quran per se, but by something that the Prophet ﷺ had informed the Sahaba about. So, the other side's argument is that hadith has to be understood in the context in which it was said, and that the conditions that are unlawful are those which contravene something explicit in the Quran or the Sunnah. By that, we come to the end of this episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أنت ربي ذو